It was the kind of December day that made the world feel alive with possibilities. The snow-covered streets of the small New England town sparkled under a crisp winter sun. Rows of houses were adorned with glowing lights, inflatable Santas, and wreaths dusted with fresh powder. Inside the Miller family home, the air was filled with the warm aroma of gingerbread cookies and the sound of cheerful Christmas carols. It was the season of joy, and Daniel, an 8-year-old bundle of curiosity, was at the center of it all. Daniel's golden curls bobbed as he darted from room to room, stopping occasionally to inspect the twinkling ornaments on the Christmas tree. "Mom, do you think Santa really knows what I want this year?" he asked, his wide brown eyes full of wonder. His mother, Mary, knelt by the fireplace, carefully arranging stockings embroidered with their names. She smiled warmly at her son. "Santa always knows, sweetheart. But remember, Christmas isn't just about gifts." Daniel nodded earnestly, though his thoughts were more occupied with his plans to build the ultimate snow fort later that afternoon. His father, Tom, sat at the kitchen table, stringing popcorn garlands and humming along to Bing Crosby's White Christmas. Tom's sturdy frame and weathered hands told the story of a man who had worked hard all his life to provide for his family, but his soft smile revealed a tenderness reserved only for Mary and Daniel. As the family bustled about, preparing for their annual holiday traditions, the scene was one of peace and harmony. Yet beneath the cheerful facade, there was a subtle weight in Mary's eyes as she adjusted the angel atop the tree. "Tom," she said quietly, breaking the hum of holiday cheer, "do you ever think about how fragile life can be? How quickly things can change?" Tom looked up, startled by the somber tone in her voice. "Sometimes," he admitted, setting the garland aside. "But that's why we have to make the most of moments like this." Their conversation was interrupted by Daniel's excited shout from the living room. "It's snowing again," he declared, pressing his face to the frosty window pane. His excitement was infectious, and the weight of Mary's reflection seemed to lift, at least for now. Together, the family turned their attention back to the joy of the season, blissfully unaware of the shadow that loomed just beyond the horizon. The snowstorm came suddenly, a swirling tempest of white that blanketed the roads in minutes. Tom gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening as he navigated the slick streets. The family was on their way to the town's Christmas market, a cherished tradition. Daniel sat in the back seat, bundled in his puffy red coat, humming Jingle Bells to himself. Mary glanced nervously out the window, her earlier unease creeping back into her thoughts. "Tom, maybe we should turn back," she suggested, her voice tight with worry. The windshield wipers struggled to keep pace with the falling snow, creating a rhythm that was both hypnotic and foreboding. Tom shook his head. "We're almost there," he replied, his tone firm but reassuring. "The market's only a few more blocks away." Suddenly, the cheerful tune of the radio was interrupted by a loud blare of horns. From the corner of her eye, Mary saw it, a large delivery truck skidding uncontrollably down the hill toward them. "Tom!" she screamed, her voice slicing through the cold air. Tom reacted instantly, swerving to avoid the truck, but the icy road betrayed him. The family's car spun wildly before slamming into the guardrail. The impact was deafening. Daniel's cheerful humming was replaced by a terrified cry as the car crumpled around them. Mary's head hit the window, and the world tilted violently before going black. Tom, still conscious, fought to turn and check on his family, but his chest was pinned by the airbag. When Mary came to moments later, her vision blurred and her head pounding. The sight that greeted her was one of chaos. Their car was a mangled wreck, steam rising from the crushed hood. Tom was slumped over the steering wheel, groaning softly, but her attention immediately turned to the back seat. "Daniel!" she cried, her voice raw with panic. He was motionless, his small frame slumped against the seatbelt. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, stark against his pale skin. Mary reached out, but pain shot through her side, immobilizing her. The wail of sirens pierced the freezing air as paramedics arrived. They worked quickly, extracting Mary and Tom before turning their focus to Daniel. "He's not breathing," one of them shouted, and Mary's world began to crumble. She watched helplessly as they pulled Daniel from the wreckage, his limp body a devastating contrast to his vibrant energy just minutes earlier. In the ambulance, paramedics administered CPR, their faces grim with determination. Mary clutched Tom's hand as they followed behind, both of them praying silently, desperately. At the hospital, Daniel was rushed into the emergency room. Mary and Tom waited in agonizing silence, every second stretching into eternity. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression unreadable. "We've done everything we can," he said, his voice heavy. "I'm sorry, but your son has been pronounced clinically dead." Mary's scream echoed through the sterile hallways, a sound of pure, unrelenting grief. Tom sank to his knees, his strength gone. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded, as the world seemed to hold its breath for what would come next. Daniel's first sensation was one of weightlessness. The crushing pain that had enveloped him moments earlier was gone, replaced by an odd stillness. He opened his eyes, or at least he thought he did. But instead of seeing the hospital room, he found himself hovering above it. Below, he could see the chaotic scene unfold as if he were an unseen spectator. Doctors and nurses surrounded his small body, their movements urgent and deliberate. A nurse called out numbers Daniel didn't understand, while a doctor performed compressions on his chest. His parents were just outside the room, their faces pale and strained with grief. His mother was sobbing, her hands pressed together as though in prayer, while his father stood motionless, staring at the floor with hollow eyes. The sight filled Daniel with a strange sense of sadness, yet he couldn't look away. "I'm right here," he tried to say, but no sound came out. He wasn't frightened, though. He felt oddly calm, as though he were meant to see this. Then, he felt a pull, a gentle but irresistible tug, like a current, drawing him into an unseen tide. He turned away from the hospital room as his surroundings began to dissolve into a soft, glowing light. The light surrounded him, warm and inviting. Yet something felt different. It wasn't as serene as he expected. Beneath the calm, he sensed a faint tremor, like an unspoken tension vibrating at the edges of the light. As he moved further into the glow, the unsettling sensation faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. Ahead, a tunnel of light stretched endlessly, its walls shimmering like liquid gold. Daniel felt himself being pulled forward, gliding effortlessly through the tunnel. The light grew brighter with every passing moment, filling him with a profound sense of love and belonging. He felt lighter than he ever had, as though he had shed every burden he'd ever carried. At the end of the tunnel, he emerged into a space so beautiful it took his breath away. Colors he couldn't describe painted the sky in brilliant hues, and the air seemed to hum with an otherworldly melody. Figures of light surrounded him, their forms radiant and ethereal. Though they didn't speak, Daniel understood them perfectly. They emanated a love so pure, so complete, that it enveloped him like a warm embrace. For a moment, he forgot about everything. The hospital, the accident, even his parents' grief. Here, in this place of beauty and light, he felt whole, as though he had come home. But deep within, he sensed that this was only the beginning. As Daniel stood amidst the celestial beings, one of them stepped forward, their light shimmering with a golden hue. The being gestured gently, and without words, Daniel understood. It was time to move forward. He followed, feeling a mix of curiosity and wonder as they glided toward a new realm. Suddenly, the surroundings shifted. The radiant light softened into a warm glow, and Daniel found himself in what looked like a perfect Christmas village. Snow blanketed the ground, but it wasn't cold. The flakes sparkled like diamonds, catching the soft light that seemed to radiate from everywhere. Quaint cottages with thatched roofs lined the streets, their windows glowing warmly. The air was filled with the sound of bells chiming and a harmonious chorus of voices singing carols that resonated deep within Daniel's soul. A large evergreen tree stood at the center of the village, its branches adorned with golden ribbons and ornaments that shimmered like stars. The tree glowed from within, its light pulsing gently, as if it were alive. Everywhere Daniel looked, there was joy. Children laughing, families gathered, and a profound sense of love that seemed to flow through every corner of the village. "Where am I?" Daniel finally asked, his voice small but steady. "You are in the heart of Christmas," a melodic voice answered. He turned to see an angel, their figure radiant and graceful, standing beside him. Their wings shimmered with iridescent light, and their eyes held a kindness that put Daniel at ease. "This is what Christmas is meant to be," the angel continued, "a celebration of love, faith, and the divine gift given to the world. But few see it this way anymore. Too often the true meaning of Christmas is forgotten." Daniel's gaze fell on the tree, its golden glow captivating. As he stared, the angel's words echoed in his heart. He felt the weight of their truth, a heaviness that contrasted with the beauty around him. Then, from the far end of the village, a figure began to approach. Unlike the radiant beings and joyful villagers, this figure carried a quiet solemnity. Dressed in a simple white robe, his presence was both powerful and tender. His eyes, a deep and endless well of compassion, met Daniel's, and in that instant, Daniel knew who he was. "Jesus," Daniel whispered. Jesus knelt down, his gaze steady and filled with love. "Daniel," he said, his voice as soft as the snow falling around them, "I have brought you here to show you something very important." Daniel felt a lump in his throat as he nodded. The joy of the heavenly Christmas village seemed to dim slightly, replaced by an air of seriousness. He didn't know what Jesus was about to show him, but he could sense that it would change him forever. Daniel stood silently before Jesus, the warm glow of the Christmas village fading as a new scene began to take shape around them. The radiant light dimmed, replaced by a vast, shimmering expanse of nothingness. He could feel the weight of something important, something far beyond his understanding, pressing down on him. Jesus placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, his gaze solemn, yet filled with compassion. "Daniel," he said gently, "what I am about to show you is not to frighten you, but to help you understand. Humanity is drifting away from what truly matters, and you must help them remember." The space around them shimmered, and suddenly Daniel was standing in a busy city square. It was the Christmas season. He could tell by the lights and decorations that adorned every storefront. Yet something was wrong. The lights, though bright, felt hollow, and the faces of the people passing by were marked with stress and exhaustion. Jesus gestured toward a family walking through the square. The parents were arguing over a shopping list, their voices sharp and filled with frustration. The children trailed behind, their eyes glued to glowing screens. "Do you see?" Jesus asked. "They have forgotten what Christmas is meant to be. It is no longer about love or togetherness, but about what they can buy, what they can gain." The scene shifted again, and Daniel found himself in a luxurious home. A large tree stood in the corner, its branches heavy with expensive ornaments. Beneath it were stacks of presents, their shiny wrapping paper catching the light, but the room was cold, not in temperature, but in spirit. A group of people sat on couches and chairs, each absorbed in their own devices, barely speaking to one another. The joy that Daniel associated with Christmas was absent, replaced by a sense of emptiness. "Christmas has become a celebration of self," Jesus said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Materialism, selfishness, and division have taken the place of love, faith, and compassion. The light of Christmas is dimming, and if it continues, it may be extinguished entirely." Daniel felt his chest tighten as Jesus continued. "There is still hope, but it requires a change of heart. People must return to the essence of what this season represents: love, generosity, and a connection to one another and to God. Without this change, the consequences will be dire. The air around them grew colder, and Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. The vibrant colors of the earlier scenes were replaced by a dull, oppressive gray. "I must show you what could happen if humanity does not change its path," Jesus said, his voice somber. Daniel found himself in a desolate cityscape. It was Christmas, but there was no joy. The streets were lined with broken decorations, their lights flickering weakly. Storefronts that once displayed festive cheer were boarded up, and the few people who wandered the streets looked weary and hollow. "What happened?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. "This is a world where Christmas has lost its meaning entirely," Jesus replied. "Without love, generosity, and compassion, the season becomes empty. Greed and division have taken hold, and the darkness has spread." As Jesus spoke, the scene shifted to a large gathering. People sat around a massive table laden with food and expensive gifts, but their faces were filled with anger and suspicion. Arguments broke out over trivial matters, voices raised and fingers pointing. Daniel felt a knot in his stomach as he watched the chaos unfold. "They have lost their way," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "When people forget to love one another, when they prioritize themselves over others, the darkness grows stronger." Suddenly, the sky above them darkened further, and a shadow began to spread across the landscape. It wasn't just physical darkness, it was something deeper, a palpable sense of despair and disconnection. The laughter and music that Daniel associated with Christmas were gone, replaced by silence and tension. Daniel turned to Jesus, tears welling up in his eyes. "Why are you showing me this? I'm just a kid. What can I do?" Jesus knelt down, his eyes meeting Daniel's with infinite kindness. "You were chosen because of your heart, Daniel. You understand love in its purest form, and that is what the world needs to hear. People will listen to you because you speak with the innocence and sincerity of a child." Daniel felt the weight of the message pressing down on him. He didn't know how he could carry such a burden, but Jesus' hand on his shoulder filled him with a sense of strength he didn't know he had. "The world can change, Daniel," Jesus said, "but it starts with a single light. Share what you've seen and help others remember what Christmas is truly about." As the scene began to fade, Daniel felt the warmth of the Christmas village once more, but the images of the desolation and despair lingered in his mind. He knew that his life would never be the same. He had seen the consequences of humanity's choices, and now it was up to him to help bring the light back into the world. The warmth of the heavenly realm began to fade, and Daniel felt a strange pull, like an invisible hand tugging him away from the light. Panic rose in his chest. "Please don't make me leave," he pleaded, his voice trembling. The beauty, the peace. He didn't want to go back to the cold, broken world he had glimpsed. Jesus knelt before him, radiating love and compassion. "Daniel," he said gently, "your time here is not over. You have been chosen to carry a message of hope and warning to the world. What you've seen must be shared, so others can find their way back to the light." Tears streamed down Daniel's face. "But I'm just a kid. How can I do this?" Jesus placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, and a wave of calm washed over him. "You won't be alone. I will be with you always. You have the strength within you to make others listen. Your innocence, your faith, that is why you were chosen." The pull grew stronger, and Daniel felt his body being drawn backward, away from the heavenly Christmas village. The radiant figures around him began to blur, their light merging into a golden haze. "I'll try," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "I'll try." As he was pulled further from the light, a deep darkness enveloped him, cold and heavy. Suddenly he gasped, his lungs filling with air. His eyes flew open, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room came into focus. "Daniel!" His mother's voice pierced through the haze of his return. She was at his bedside, clutching his hand, her face streaked with tears. His father stood frozen, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. The medical team, who had just pronounced him clinically dead, rushed back to his side, their expressions a mixture of shock and awe. "He's back," one of them exclaimed, frantically checking his vitals. The room buzzed with frantic activity as they confirmed the impossible. Daniel was alive. But Daniel felt different. The peace and warmth he had just left behind were replaced by a heavy ache, both physical and emotional. He remembered everything: the beauty of the light, the joy of the heavenly Christmas village, and the terrifying vision of the world's future. The weight of his mission pressed down on him, even as his parents wept tears of relief. Though his body was weak, Daniel spoke in a hoarse whisper. "Mom, Dad, I saw him." His parents exchanged confused glances, unsure of what he meant, but Daniel's gaze was steady, his voice carrying a strength beyond his years. "I saw Jesus." The days following Daniel's miraculous recovery were a whirlwind of emotions. His parents, Mary and Tom, were overjoyed to have their son back, but they couldn't shake the strangeness of what had happened. Doctors marveled at Daniel's recovery, calling it a medical miracle, though they had no explanation for how he had survived. Daniel, however, struggled to adapt to being back. His memories of heaven and the warning he had received were as vivid as the hospital room around him. He wanted desperately to share what he had seen, but every time he tried, he was met with confusion or disbelief. The first time he told his parents, Mary listened with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You saw Jesus?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Yes," Daniel replied firmly. "He showed me things, Mom. He told me to warn people." Mary nodded slowly, but Tom furrowed his brow. "Daniel," his father said gently, "you've been through so much. Maybe these are just dreams, things your brain created because of the accident." Daniel shook his head vehemently. "It wasn't a dream, Dad. I saw him. He told me people need to stop being selfish. He showed me the darkness." Mary touched Tom's arm. "He's just a boy, Tom. Let him speak." But the skepticism in Tom's eyes lingered, and Daniel could feel the weight of his father's doubt. Outside the family, reactions were even more mixed. The doctors dismissed his vivid descriptions of heaven as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation. Friends and neighbors, curious about his recovery, would listen politely but quickly change the subject when Daniel began to talk about the warning he had received. The hardest moment came when Daniel's best friend Jason visited. "You were dead?" Jason asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "For a little while," Daniel replied earnestly. "I saw angels, and Jesus talked to me. He told me people need to remember what Christmas is about." Jason laughed nervously. "You sound crazy, dude. That didn't really happen." The words stung, but Daniel didn't argue. He simply lowered his head, the weight of his mission feeling heavier than ever. But amidst the skepticism, there were moments of hope. Mary, though shaken, began to feel a renewed sense of faith as she listened to her son. She saw the conviction in his eyes, the way he spoke with clarity and passion far beyond his years. Slowly, she began to believe that Daniel's experience was real. One night, as she tucked him into bed, Mary whispered, "Daniel, I believe you." Daniel looked up, his eyes wide with relief. "Really?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What you're saying, it's not something a child could make up. I don't understand it, but I believe you were sent back for a reason." Her words gave Daniel the strength to keep going. Though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew he couldn't give up. He had seen the light, felt the love, and witnessed the darkness. Now, it was his turn to share that truth with the world, one person at a time. The first time Daniel spoke about his experience in front of an audience, his hands trembled. He stood on the small stage at his church, looking out at a sea of familiar faces. The sanctuary was decorated for Christmas, the warm glow of candlelight reflecting off garlands and ornaments. His parents stood just off to the side, offering him reassuring smiles. Daniel took a deep breath and began. "I know you all heard about what happened to me. I was in a bad accident, and for a little while, I wasn't here anymore." His voice wavered, but he pressed on. "I went to heaven. I saw Jesus." There was a ripple of murmurs from the crowd, but Daniel didn't falter. "Jesus told me something important. He showed me what Christmas is supposed to be. A time for love, for giving, for remembering what matters most. But he also showed me what could happen if we forget." The room fell silent. Daniel described the visions Jesus had shared with him, the light of Christmas dimming, replaced by greed and division. "Jesus said we need to change," Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength. "We need to stop thinking only about ourselves. We need to love each other the way he loves us." When he finished, the silence hung in the air for a long moment. Then, someone in the back began to clap. Slowly, the applause spread, until the room was filled with the sound of hands meeting, not just for his courage, but for the truth in his words. That night marked the beginning of Daniel's Christmas mission. With his parents' support, he started sharing his story wherever he could. At community centers, living rooms, and even school holiday events, Daniel spoke with a conviction that moved hearts. His message was simple. Christmas is not about the gifts under the tree, but the love we share and the faith that connects us. At first, not everyone believed him. There were skeptics who dismissed his story as the imagination of a child. But Daniel didn't argue or try to prove them wrong. Instead, he let his words and actions speak for themselves. He encouraged people to focus on acts of kindness, visiting the lonely, helping those in need, and forgiving past grievances. Slowly, Daniel's message began to take root. Families who had drifted apart started reaching out to one another. Neighbors who rarely spoke began helping each other with snow shoveling or holiday baking. A sense of warmth and unity began to return to the town, small but unmistakable. For Daniel, each moment of connection felt like a victory, a tiny light pushing back against the darkness he had seen in his visions. It was Christmas Eve, and the church was alive with anticipation. The congregation gathered for the candlelight service, their faces glowing with warmth and expectation. Daniel sat in the front pew with his family, watching as the sanctuary filled to capacity. For the first time in years, the seats were completely full. The service began with carols, the voices of the choir blending harmoniously with the congregation. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked around the room. The people seemed different, lighter, as if the weight of the world had lifted from their shoulders, if only for tonight. When the pastor invited Daniel to speak, he walked to the pulpit with steady steps. This time, he wasn't nervous. He felt the strength of his mission guiding him. "Tonight," Daniel began, "we celebrate the birth of Jesus, the greatest gift of love the world has ever known. But this Christmas feels different to me, and I hope it does for you too." He paused, letting his words settle. "This year, I've seen people come together in ways I never thought possible. I've seen neighbors helping neighbors, families finding forgiveness, and strangers showing kindness. That's what Christmas is about. That's the light Jesus wants us to carry, not just tonight, but every day." The congregation listened intently, many wiping tears from their eyes. Daniel's words, though simple, carried a profound weight. He shared the hope he had felt in the heavenly Christmas village and the warning he had been given. "We all have a choice," he said, "to let the darkness spread or to be the light that pushes it back. I know which one I'm choosing." As he stepped down from the pulpit, the pastor invited everyone to light their candles. One by one, the flames spread through the sanctuary, filling it with a soft golden glow. Daniel watched as the light illuminated every face, a living symbol of the message he had carried back from heaven. After the service, Families lingered outside in the crisp winter air, laughing and hugging. A group of children built a snowman near the nativity scene, their laughter ringing out like music. Daniel stood with his parents, watching the joy spread around him. For the first time since his return, he felt a sense of peace. But as much as the night filled him with hope, Daniel knew his mission wasn't over. The choice between light and darkness wasn't a one-time decision. It was one people would have to make every day. He thought of the vision Jesus had shown him, the swirling darkness that could consume the world if people forgot to love. As the first snowflakes began to fall, Daniel whispered a prayer. "Thank you for showing me, Jesus. I'll keep trying no matter what." The stars above sparkled like tiny candles in the vast darkness, a reminder that even the smallest light could make a difference. And Daniel knew that as long as there was love, faith, and kindness in the world, the light would never be extinguished. If you believe in God and Jesus Christ and want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel by clicking the subscribe button right below.